Mr. Abbott.
Yes, I'll be short, Your Honour. Mr. Rofe, I want to ask you about some commendations that you've received during the 3 years that you worked at Alice Springs in your role as a member of the Northern Territory.
Just take a minute to let everyone come inside.
In your role as a member of the Northern Territory Police Force, I'll deal with the most recent in time first. It is on the brief as document 3-173, and it is a commendation that you received in terms of an email on the 8th of September 2019, 2 months before the incident.
Yes.
Which this inquest has been dealing with. It's a commendation from Dr. Petra Nicholson, Niclasen, Niclasen, the Director of the Central Australian Retrieval Service. And it's written to Dear Brad, and the email makes it clear that it's to Bradley Curry. Who was Bradley Curry at that time?
I believe he was the commander of Alice Springs Station.
It says, Dear Brad, I wanted to send a thank you through to the local police, and in particular mention Zach Rolfe for going above and beyond the other night when there was an extremely distressed 13-year-old boy in the emergency department that I accidentally became involved with. I have CC'd the doctor in charge that night, consultant Dr. Anna Fairburn, who was similarly impressed. This boy was very distressed and was intermittently self-harming, and Zach took it upon himself to step in and help us. He was very non-confrontational, calm and gentle. He then was able to help locate family and ensure a safe discharge location. Apparently the night before, Zach had been similarly helpful, and many staff in the emergency department were telling me how helpful he had been. Do you recall when you received that commendation?
I recall that incident, yes.
Was the commendation in fact sent to you?
I don't believe I received that email through the police force, no.
Did Mr. Curry, for example, say anything to you about this incident?
Not that I can recall.
And when did you first become aware of this commendation letter?
Through a mutual friend who later knew that the woman who sent that email, who made me aware that there had been an email sent.
Thank you. Going backwards in time, I now want to refer to a commendation that mentions you on. It was sent 31st of December 2018, and the letter was thereafter. It's document 3-172. And it's from Lee Bowens to Bradley Curry, subject Borroloola Police Station, and it refers to the IRT having done a great job at Borroloola arresting escaped custody Noble. Do you remember that episode?
Yes, I do.
Yes. And what was the great job that you'd done?
I believe in that incident a offender had actually escaped custody out of the police station watch house.
Yes.
In Borroloola. We attended and as IRT communicated with the community and worked with the local police and the community in order to locate and arrest that offender.
Okay. The third document, by way of commendation for the work that you did, is on the Coronial brief as 3-171, and it's an email sent on the 28th of December 2018 to a number of people, including you, and it's from Tanya Mace. Tanya Mace is describes herself in this email as the acting superintendent, Tennant Creek and Barclay Division of the Northern Territory Police. That's your understanding?
Yes.
Yes. It says, "Good morning, team. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all personally for your hard work and dedication over the past couple of days, which have been rough by anyone's standards. First, you had to deal with the unlawful entries of both the Heartbreak Hotel and, most significantly, the Borroloola Police Station on 22nd of December. You were then confronted with the aggravated assault of a young man from the community who succumbed to his injuries on Wednesday, the 26th of December. Then, to compound matters, at approximately 22:05 hours on Wednesday, the 26th of December, one of the prisoners you'd remanded in custody escaped as he was being provided for a cup of tea." And then it refers to recapturing the offender, which I think is in the other commendation I've just referred to.
Yes.
And the commendation concludes, "Despite having very little respite, you have without hesitation stood together, side by side, to investigate these offences, recaptured the escaped prisoner, produced prosecution files and risk assessments for transport and maintained prisoner watch, all while continuing to manage day-to-day running of the community. This is what policing, especially policing in the bush, is all about. Standing together with your colleagues, your mates, to get the job done, pushing through those impossible barriers, pushing through the fatigue that very few would understand. I have been there and so have intimate knowledge of what it takes to be a bush cop, which makes me appreciate all your hard work and dedication all the more. You should all be extremely proud of what you've achieved over the past days. Thank you." Do you remember receiving that commendation?
Yes, and that's in regard to working up north in a community where IRT worked regularly with the local police there out bush, and worked in the way that we tried to work in all communities, where we worked in conjunction with the local police, and basically everything we did was morphed with them, and that we worked together rather than being a separate entity.
In particular, the bush police that we've heard so much about from Dr. Freckleton.
Exactly, yes.
Yes. I tender these three.
They're already part of the brief.
Thank you.
Mr. Abbott.
Could I just ask you a few questions about what I compendiously refer to as the Ryder incident?
Yes.
You gave evidence at page 5264 in answer to a question by my learned friend Dr. Dwyer, who was asking you about this incident. You gave a long answer. I won't read it all out. It's about your view of His Honour Judge Borchers, but you concluded by saying, "I also knew that he was wrong." This is reference to his written decision that you're being asked about. "I also knew that he was wrong about what had occurred. We had a junior, I just had a fairly junior prosecutor. A particular witness wasn't called that would have assisted us, and the defence lawyer was very good at his job." Who was the particular witness who would have assisted us that you were referring to?
I believe it was Cam Chatterton.
I have a copy of Cameron Chatterton's statement, his statutory declaration, dated the 28th of March 2018, which is document 3-110. Have you seen that statutory declaration?
In the past, yes.
In the past? Not recently?
Not recently.
No. I won't, And on the basis that he was the witness who would have assisted the case, do you recall what he attested to in his statutory declaration?
I believe he corroborated the rest of our evidence, and I informed him what had occurred at the front of the location, and he witnessed a slight injury to my face.
It was put to you by my learned friend counsel assisting at page 5275 of the transcript. I'll summarise it. That Ms. Campagnaro had reported that you had told her that you got a detective to scratch your face shortly after the Ryder incident, and that was the result of the injury to your face. Do you remember being questioned about that aspect by my learned friend?
Yes.
And you denied that that was so?
Correct.
And in fact, did you have an injury to your face as a result of Mr. Ryder's assault on you?
Yes, a slight one.
Yes. And could I read out to you what Mr. Cameron Chatterton says at paragraph 13 of his statutory declaration? Rolf came to where 669 was parked a short time later. He stated that the second male had punched him. I observed that he had a red mark on his forehead where he had been struck. What is 669?
669 is one of the police vehicles.
And is it correct that you stated to Cameron Chatterton that the second male, namely Mr. Ryder, had punched you?
Yes, I'd accept that.
Yes. And is it correct, or is his observation correct, that you had a red mark on your forehead where you had been struck by Mr. Ryder?
Yes.
And by the way, Your Honour, this statutory declaration is dated the 28th of March 2018. Since it's on the brief, I need not tender it.
Yes.
Could I just ask you a couple of questions about your attitude, which has been the subject of many questions from other learned counsellors in this matter. There are two aspects, really. It's been put to you that your actions have been motivated by some form of racism or by race. What do you say to that suggestion?
I disagree with that completely.
Can I then put you compendiously, the use of force incidents that have been put to you, I think the suggestions all in respect to each of them has been that each of them have been, your actions in the use of force have somehow been motivated by race. What do you say to that?
Yeah, there's been zero racial motivation at all.
And in particular, it's been put to you that your actions on the 9th of November 2019, resulting in the death of Kumanjayi Walker, were somehow motivated by race and your attitude to race and the fact that Kumanjayi was an Aboriginal person. What do you say to that?
Again, his race played no part in my motivation or what had occurred that night.
I want to ask you a question about your training. You've given some evidence about the training that you received in the Northern Territory Police Force. Was it extensive in some areas?
In some areas, yes.
In particular, in relation to arrests, use of force?
Yes.
And in relation to the use of force incidents that we've heard, and I won't go through them one by one, is it your evidence that at all times you conducted yourself in accordance with the training that you had received?
Yes.
And in particular, in relation to the incident on the 9th of November 2019, which resulted in the death of Kumanjayi Walker, is it your evidence that at all times you acted in accordance with the training you had received?
Yes.
By the way, you did have your body-worn camera video on that night.
Yes, I did.
Yes. Could I just ask you, I want to ask you just one question about 9th of November 2019. It might be said by some in submissions or otherwise that the attack on you by the deceased Kumanjayi Walker was not serious and it was only a pair of scissors. Was any evidence given during your trial about the possible lethal effect of those pair of scissors?
Yes, a few witnesses gave expert testimony on the lethality of those scissors. In particular, an AFP officer, I believe his last name was Simpson, he gave evidence that he had conducted a test utilising, I believe, pork belly, which is the main.
Because it's the nearest thing to human flesh that's readily available.
Correct. So I believe he had placed a police shirt, the same shirt that I was wearing that night, over a piece of pork belly. And I believe his evidence was that he used medium force to strike that pork belly in the same motion that Kumanjayi used on the night, and just utilising medium force, the blade penetrated the pork belly the entire way up to the handle. Further than 3 inches, which is more than enough to strike an artery.
One last question. My learned friend, Dr. Freckleton, made much in his examination of you of your failure to wear body-worn video in relation to some of the use of force incidents, and he went through 5 of them.
Yes.
You were arrested in relation to the incident on the 9th of November 2019, some days later.
Yes.
Do you remember that arrest?
Yes, I do.
I'm sure you do. How many police officers or members of the Northern Territory Police Force were present at the time when you were actually arrested?
I believe 5 were.
Could you give us their names, please?
Kirk Panuto, Mark Malagorski.
And their ranks, if you know them.
I believe they're all detectives. I don't know the particular ranks.
Right.
But I believe it was Kirk Panuto, I believe Wayne Newell, Mark Malagorski.
So slowly.
Sorry. Kirk Panuto, Mark Malagorski.
Yes.
Wayne Newell.
Yes.
Isabel Cummins.
Yes.
And Andrew Kren.
Right. Were any of them wearing body-worn video?
Andrew Kren was.
Did he have it turned on?
No, he did not.
So there's no body-worn video record by the Northern Territory Police of your arrest?
None that I've seen, no.
That you're aware of anyway?
None that I'm aware of.
Yes. No further questions?
Would you want to just give me 1 moment? Sure. Thank you. Mr. Rolfe, since your evidence in February of of this year, you have assisted the court to understand where there are pockets of racism in the Northern Territory Police. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
You don't suggest that every police officer in the Northern Territory is racist or has expressed racist views, do you?
No.
But you can see the value, can't you, in understanding where racism creeps into the force.
Yes.
In another matter, an incident came to light in an inquest last week where there were police officers in a chat group for a particular strike force, and one officer took a photograph of a semi-naked Aboriginal woman and shared that photograph, and racist commentary followed. Were you aware at any time in your period as a police force of where officers swapped messages in a group like that, iMessages, as part of a strike force?
I believe potentially while I was in, there was an incident in the water squad where members were disbanded. But I heard of that. I don't know what that was about, but that was a group chat situation.
I see. And did it involve an exchange of racist messages?
I'm not sure.
Did you hear about that while you were a serving officer or afterwards?
That one I think happened while I was in.
Okay. So there was a problem in the type of messages that were being exchanged between the group?
Yeah, similar situation that was talked about last week in regard to there was a group chat, something offensive was said. One of the persons brought that to someone else's attention, and it was then the group of water police, as far as I'm aware, was disbanded, but I don't have further details. I think that happened while I was in the police force.
I see. And do you think that they were the subject of disciplinary action?
I believe that was part of their being disbanded, etc.
Were you ever part of a particular strike force when you were an officer in the Alice Principles?
Not one of those ones that are talked about. I might have been utilised for, but I was not. I don't believe I was seconded to a strike force.
All right. Were you ever part of an iMessage chat group or a WhatsApp chat group or something set up specifically for a job?
I don't believe so.
When you got into the witness box in February this year, it was the first time that you went public about racism in the NT Police Force. Is that fair?
I'd accept that, yes.
Do you say that you were a product of an environment where racism was accepted?
To an extent, I still take responsibility, but I also accept that the environment that I'm in can influence my behaviour, but I take responsibility for my part of it.
Okay. Do you, particularly though in circumstances where there are officers at ranks above you, like sergeant, do you think that you became more liberal in your use of racist terms because it was accepted?
I'd accept that, yes.
You told Her Honour on the last occasion about the certificates that were distributed amongst the TRG. When did you first hear about those certificates?
I heard about the awards whilst on the job. The certificates went to later.
I see. So the idea of there being a Nugada award, or I think you refer to it as a Gunada award.
Yes.
Some sort of award with a made-up Aboriginal name, or a made-up name sounding like an Aboriginal word.
Yes.
You heard about when you were a serving officer.
I'm not even sure if I knew the Nugara or where I was wrong. I just knew the award being what it was referred to as the Coon of the Year award.
Okay. And you heard about that when you were a serving officer?
Yes.
Who did you hear about that from?
I can't recall, but there are a number of instances where I've worked with TRG and spent a lot of time with the TRG members and have relationships with a number of the TRG members.
So it was from someone who was either a serving member of the TRG or had been?
I believe so, yes.
And when you were told about the award being for what was termed as the Coon of the Year award, were you told why it was given out? What sort of behaviour it was given for?
No, I don't believe so.
Can you recall now anything else you were told about it when you were a serving officer?
No, it was extremely vague.
Is it fair to say that the impression given to you at that time was that that was a funny award? Was it part of a humorous, or what was thought of to be a humorous?
Yes.
When you first heard about it, did you try to cast yourself back to your days as a younger officer? Did you think it was funny?
In the situation that I was in the group I was in, I may have thought it was humorous, yes.
But you acknowledged, frankly, that you become a product of your environment. Everybody does to some extent. Is that an example of where what you thought was acceptable was influenced by those around you?
Again, yes, there would be a small influence, but again, responsibility lays with me from my part.
On the last occasion, you came to court with 12 pages of notes, which are before the court. And parties have access to them. They refer to the term Gunada at page 2, but what you mean by that, you now understand, was the Nugget Award, the same thing that was being discussed about. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
On the last occasion you came to court, I think through your lawyers you provided a copy of one of the certificates.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
That came through Kerry Joy.
At page 2 of these notes, I'm only going to refer to a couple of things from them,
Yes.
but at page 2 you refer to a black card to get out of trouble.
Yes.
Do you know what that is? Was that something you knew about when you were a serving officer?
That was a particular incident I was referring to.
What is that incident?
I had a conversation with a ACPO in the police station who was dealing with some, out of work, some personal issues, drama. I believe maybe a ex-partner of his had made a complaint against him, and he was dealing with a number of, the pressures of the investigation of that, and he told me in words to the effect of the PSC or the bosses were putting so much pressure on him, gunning for him for this, and he hated to do it, but he pulled the black card, and immediately the black card meaning that he pulled the race card, that's what I took it to mean, and immediately the investigation was dropped.
You have that in your notes under the subheading racism, please. Is that something, do you say that's an example of racism that you wanted to expose when you were giving evidence?
No, again, the notes that I took are just thoughts and ponderings that I made while I was quickly skimming through the transcript. That is a thought that I had when thinking about racism that was brought up through the transcript.
But you produced those notes and you took them into the witness box because you thought that they might prompt you or assist you in giving evidence?
I had them in the witness box just because I hadn't had the chance to give them to my lawyers.
Who typed up these notes?
I did.
And there's handwriting on these notes? Whose handwriting is that?
That's mine.
At page 2, there's reference to a Neanderthal dress-up. Do you remember that? Tell me if you want to see a copy of these notes.
I would love to see.
Well, could he have a copy in front of him?
Yes.
That's what I just suggested.
Yes.
And Dr.
Yes,
I'm so sorry because we were in here a fair bit longer. Do you mind if I have a quick bathroom break?
Not at all.
Sorry, I'll be.
Sorry, I didn't hear
Mr.
that.
Rolfe requires a bathroom break.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, we've been in here a while longer.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll be.
There's no rush.
Could I trouble Melinda?
Yeah, we might. Sorry.
Another cup? Yes. My cup doesn't run over.
You're right. Thanks, Sally. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
You don't have a copy of the notes, do you, Phil? Oh, Cheers, thanks very much.
Probably clean. I think what a bit visually. What are you going to do with it?
Oh, I've been asked to borrow him a copy. What's wrong with it? Because I don't think you might have highlighted something.
I've got a clean copy. Dr. Dwyer,
Sorry,
there is a clean
I've just
copy.
found one, thank you so much.
They made some record, but not one in the Reds.
That's right. Oh, what message?
Sorry. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Rolfe, in front of you now is a copy of that document. If you just have a look at page 2,
Yes.
you see there, third bullet point, you refer to the Gunada Award
Yes.
for the most coon-like behaviour of the year. And then you say, government and NT-POL TRG emblems on it.
Yes.
Were you told something about the emblems on the award?
Yes. This was after I'd left. This is more recently to the Coronial, or
Was it Carrie Joy who told you about that or someone else?
I believe it was Kerry Joy. Yes.
Did Mr. Bowens tell you about the, Sergeant Bowens I should say, tell you about the awards also?
I don't think so.
Neanderthal dress up, what was that?
I'm not sure if that was information that I'd heard when I was in the job or afterwards. That I'd heard that they dressed up in togas to receive the
I
award.
see, that's the TRG, dressing up as in togas, is that right?
Correct.
And then you refer to the club
Yes.
and you say Superintendent Gill, the club lived above the doorway usually. You're referring to the club where Her Honour now has a photograph of that.
Yes.
Had you ever seen that club when you were a member of the police force?
I may have, without really noticing it, as I was in the cave. Not in the cave, but I'd spent a week and a half up there for selection.
That's the TRG training area, is that right?
Yes.
Clubhouse?
Their HQ, their
And did anybody ever reference the club when you were there at their headquarters?
I can't recall. They may have.
You write some names there, James Gray Spencer, Meacham King, so you've got they are people who are either in or were in the TRG, is that right?
Yes.
Is it the case though that you're not suggesting that Superintendent Gill or James Gray Spence or Meacham King ever told you about the existence of this club at any time you were serving there?
No.
A couple of bullet points down, you refer to the Black Diary, the Catherine Pinata.
Yes.
When Mr. Bolton asked you some questions about that, you didn't, I'm not being critical, but you didn't appear to actually know anything about it. Is it the case that someone else has told you about the Pinata?
So someone else has told me about the comment of the Catherine Pinata and the Black Diary I'd heard about previously, but obviously I'd heard Chinese Whispers very differently than what has come out.
Okay, I'll just break them up then. The Black Diary, what did you hear about that when you were a serving member of the police force?
So similar to what it's been presented as the Book of Truths, just a book where funny quotes made by members of TIG are kept and stored. I heard during the job that it was called a Black Diary.
Okay.
Again, spoken about with ex-TIG members that I'd worked with.
Called a Black Diary because of racist things that were in there?
I honestly assumed that it was just an actual black book.
Right.
But obviously it's not. I believe that's referring to the Book of Truth, which is red.
And did you, when you were told about it as a member of the police force, were you told by a member of the TRG?
Yes, I believe so.
And what were you told it was for?
As I said, just a book that they kept to write down funny quotes that members have said throughout the year.
Did you know anything that was written in there?
During my time in the
Yes.
police force, I can't recall anything.
Afterwards, did you find out that in fact someone had made a racist comment about Aboriginal people falling out of a pinata or appearing to in the
Yes.
street, and that was recorded as if it was funny in the Book of Truths?
Yes.
And we now have a statement from Carrie Joy where he acknowledges that he was the source of that racist comment in the first place.
Yes.
Other people thought it was funny in the TRG and wrote it down. Was it Carrie Joy who told you about it?
Correct.
Did you ever discuss that with Sergeant Bowens at any time?
I don't believe so.
Do you recall being with Carrie Joy and Sergeant Bowens at some sort of barbecue or occasion at someone's house?
Yes.
When was that?
I don't know. Maybe that was around the very first time I came up, where I was in here for an hour.
Okay, so you've now given, this is the third time you've been in the witness box. You were in there very briefly in November 2022.
Yes.
When you claimed privilege. And then you came back to give evidence in February 2024 and now this occasion.
Yes.
So did that barbecue occur either shortly before November 2022 or shortly before February 2022?
Yes, I believe so.
Which one? Sorry,
Can you recall
do you
which one?
remember?
I wouldn't. We've caught up both times I've been up, or all times I've been up.
Okay. So you've caught up with them as friends prior to November and prior to giving evidence in February.
Yes.
Inevitably, you would have discussed the issues that were being raised at the inquest.
Some.
And did you discuss these sorts of evidence or the evidence that you might give about some issues? I'm
No,
not being
I don't.
critical, that's just I'm suggesting to you it's inevitable that you would have.
Yeah, definitely. There was obviously a active thought of mine to avoid discussing evidence, especially with Sergeant Bowens, that may put him in a difficult situation.
It's fair to say, though, that the impression you got from both Carrie Joy and Sergeant Bowens was that you were being hard done by in the inquest in terms of the issues coming.
Yes, I think they agreed with that.
And did Carrie Joy suggest to you that what you should do, or one of the things you should do, is bring up the racism of other police officers?
No.
Did Bowen suggest to you that you do that?
No.
That was your idea, is that right?
I answered questions that I was asked, honestly.
Okay. But what you also did, just think about this carefully, is bring these notes into the witness box to be of some assistance to you while you were giving evidence.
Again, these notes were made for my lawyers to discuss. I failed to give them to my lawyers beforehand, and I was not aware of the Coronial rules regarding bringing paperwork into the box, as I'd watched or read a lot of the transcript, and I'm not saying that occurred with any other witness.
Excuse me, lawyers. You produced an affidavit to assist Her Honour in determining whether or not the note should be produced. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Did you write that affidavit?
Yes.
Did somebody else type it for you and you sign it?
I wrote that statement with my lawyers.
All right. And you agree with the content of that statement?
Yes.
In that affidavit, what you say is that it was you wrote these notes to direct you in the course of your evidence.
Well,
Do you recall that?
I object to that, but
One of the
he
things.
gave two explanations,
One of the
and both should be put, so if it's put as one of the,
One of the explanations that you gave was that you wrote that to direct the course of reference.
I accept that.
And included within those notes are a number of incidents which Her Honour heard about for the first time, which involved blatant racism or accusations of blatant racism from other members of the police force. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So it was your intention, if you were asked about your own racist text messages, to point to others who had used racist language.
I think the reasoning for that is not to throw others under the bus as such, but is to maybe highlight the fact that the narrative being pushed and by the Northern Territory Police Force and seemingly accepted by other legal parties was incorrect, because the narrative that was being pushed was that IRT was a small bubble that involved the only racist language being used in the police force. This is a instance where that narrative that was being pushed and accepted was wrong, and I just believe this was an instance that I could show that and prove that, and this is not the only instance where I believe that's the case.
And to your point earlier, it helps, doesn't it, for the court to understand your point of view that you're in fact a product of, to some extent, of the environment that you're putting in the police force. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you recall participating in an interview with The Australian on the 5th of December 2019, or thereabouts?
Yes.
This is the answer that you gave to Miss Shorten, who was interviewing you, at answer 236. She was asked, it's 20-73 in the brief, and is the Northern Territory Police Force a racist police force? And you say no, definitely no. There is no racism involved in the police force that I've seen. Do you recall making that comment to Ms. Shorten?
Yes.
And this is the article, or reading from the article, that she wrote. It's 20-74. It's an article called Zachary Rolfe Documentary Exclusive, Murder Charge Entry Cop Reveals Why He Shot Kumanjayi Walker and How He Tried to Save His Life. This is the 5th of December 2019, before you have ever given any version of events to the Northern Territory Police. Do you agree?
Yes.
And within weeks of Kumanjayi's passing.
Yes.
And what is recorded there is also, honestly, I have not witnessed racism among my colleagues during my time policing. That was what you told me, Shorten.
Yes.
Do you agree with that? Here's some of the evidence that you've given in this court. On the 26th of February 2024, racist language was utilised nearly daily. It's transcript. That's transcript 5133.
Excuse me, I have an objection to this. I have an objection that this is not proper for this to be in re-examination. This should have been raised, if it's to be raised at all, in the Learned Friends examination in chief. And this is another bite at the cherry to try and have a go at my client.
I'm not having a go at Mr. Rolfe at all.
Well, it sounds like it.
Sorry, Mr. Abbott, could you just sit down while I'm making a submission, and then I'll sit down when you're making a submission.
I've made my objection. I'd like to rule on it.
I'm not having a go at Mr. Rolfe, as Mr. Abbott suggests. On the contrary, I'm asking him to clarify his evidence. Notes were provided after I asked questions of Mr. Rolfe, and I'm entitled to ask him questions in my respectful submission in relation to the 12 pages that have been produced, as every other party is. If anything arises that Mr. Abbott thinks is unfair that he needs to clarify, he can make an application. It was specifically put by Mr. Abbott that racism played no part in Kumanjayi's passing, and Mr. Rolfe was given a chance to comment on that. Issues in relation to racism and specifically what's raised in the notes do arise in re-examination, and I'll press the question.
Yes, in my view it does arise, particularly from the notes that have been provided. However, I note that Mr. Abbott may wish to make an application at the completion of this evidence seeks to ask, and I will certainly hear Mr. Adams' application.
May it please the court. Mr. Roth, I'm reading from it evidence that you've given after I've asked you questions to other parties. It includes this. On the 26th of February 2024 at page 5133, racist language was utilised nearly daily. At transcript page 5134 on the same date, racist language is used everywhere in the Northern Territory Police. 5138 on the 26th of February, racism was more amongst the connies or the constables. And at 5138 you say, at the beginning of your time in the Northern Territory Police Force, the racist language you witnessed by Northern Territory Police Force officers shocked you. How does that fit with the story that you told to Ms. Shorten, that you had not seen racism in the Northern Territory Police Force?
Well, I've always held the fact that there's a view, and there's my view, that there's a separation between racist language and racist actions. Racist actions being what I perceived as racism. And again, I've seen racist language in the NT Police, and it's hard for me to ever say that have I seen an overt racist act in the NT Police. That's hard. Some of these are the ponderings, such as the black card incident. In hindsight, I can look back and I can ask myself, is there racism in the NT? Is there race-based policies? Is there a lower expectation for some race other than more so than others? Does that constitute racism? At the time, on the most simple terms, it's the separation between racist language and racism, which I believe was racist acts that I refer to.
Mr. Rolfe, what you say to Ms. Shorten is honestly, I have not witnessed racism among my colleagues during my time in policing, but what you were aware of, you say, when you were a police officer in the Northern Territory, is something referred to as a coon of the world. That is clearly overt racist behaviour in the Northern Territory Police Force that you were aware of when you were interviewed by Ms. Shorten. Do you accept that?
I accept it. In my view, again, it's the difference between racist language and a racist act. And again, everything I say is not perfect in the time. There may be memory issues or a number of things, but in my view, there was the separation between racist language and racist action.
You were asked by Mr. McMahon, I think, about some of your conduct and whether you reflected on if it would be hurtful for the family. Did you reflect at the time that you were getting those interviews with Ms. Shorten about whether that would be hurtful for Kumanjayi's family, community, within weeks of his death, for you to be giving interviews with the Australian?
Again, the reason I organised that interview with the Australian was I was already under the impression that the investigation was going down a obscure and potentially corrupt route, and I wanted to prepare for the worst case scenario, which was getting found guilty without the full evidence being made available. So I did that for that reason. So honestly, at the time, I wasn't really considering that was the main priority that I was considering when doing that interview.
You wanted to get on the front foot and put your own version forward, is that right?
No, that I wanted to have something in my proverbial pocket for if I did get found guilty, or if I did get my bail revoked for some reason or another, that the truth, including the body-worn video, could come out there.
It wasn't just in your proverbial pocket. Ms. Shorten published an article in December 2019, within weeks of... I'll withdraw that. I'll just check on that. Do you say that you wanted a story out there with Ms. Shorten so that it could be deployed in your favour in the event that things didn't go your way in the trial?
Again, I said that I wanted to have something that would be allowed the truth of the situation to get out there if that was prevented from occurring.
I put to you on the last occasion that before I had the notes, that your motivation for coming into the witness box in February 2024, the first time you gave substantive evidence, and revealing racism was to get back, at least in part, to get back at people who were critical of your actions at the time of your arrest, including, for example, Superintendent Holmes. Do you recall me saying that to you?
Yes.
Suggest to you, Mr. Rolfe, that your notes, those 12 pages, make it clear that there were a number of officers who were critical of you, that were on a hit list effectively, that you would criticise if you were given the opportunity. Meacham King, Mr. Chalker, Vickery, Sachin Sharma, Derek Williams, Frost, people who had disagreed with you or given evidence that contradicted you, you were going to take the opportunity to have a go at them when you gave evidence.
I disagree. I can see how you would look that way, and again, these are thoughts that I've written down while reading the transcript. Not too much weight should be put on them. They're not even all of them are my opinions. They're just thoughts that I've had while reading the transcript. I wouldn't judge too harshly, because then we're moving into the territory of beyond private messages. We're moving into thought policing. But reading through the transcript, the people that you've just read out now are obviously mentioned. They've given evidence, which would therefore make me think of them. And it's probably another thing to highlight how during this coronial, some witnesses' evidence has been accepted non-critically, face value with no corroboration, whereas other evidence, such as my evidence, and a few others, has been met argumentatively in a different manner. So that's a reason where some of that evidence is there, all those names are there.
That's a reason for you being disgruntled about a number of things, complaining about me as counsel assisting, etc.
If I was to make a complaint about you, I would say that you do accept some evidence at face value with no criticism, and you are extremely argumentative with other evidence that seemingly does not fit the narrative.
Thank you for that feedback, Mr. Ross.
Sorry, I thought that's what you asked me.
When you accept, don't you, that your role in this evidence, in this inquest, is extremely important because you are the one who shot dead Kumanjayi.
Yes.
You accept that you've got important evidence to give in this inquest as a result of that.
Yes.
And you accept that I'm entitled to test it in my role as counsel assistant.
Yes.
Dr. Freckleton outlined your service in the Northern Territory Police Force from December 2016, your substantive service through to November 2019. Over those 3 years, you developed a reputation, didn't you, for being the fittest and the fastest amongst your colleagues?
Well, I object to this. This is covered originally by my learned friend's examination.
It's just a leading question, I think.
Very well, I'll sit down.
I assume there's going to be, it's going somewhere,
Yes.
Mr. Abbott, and as I said, you will have an opportunity to ask.
I won't be taking advantage of any opportunity. I want to make sure my client finishes shortly.
I'll finish before lunch, but subject to objections. Mr. Rolfe, Dr. Freckleton outlined your service. I suggested to you that during those 3 years you developed a reputation for being the fittest and the fastest amongst your colleagues.
I think that would be fair to say amongst some, yes.
You developed a reputation for being hard and fast and decisive.
I would accept that was said.
You had training in the use of force as a result of your time in the military that some of your colleagues had not had.
Yes, and other elements of use of force, yes.
But also training because of your interest in the TRG and the IRT, and you had extra training in that regard that some of your colleagues in general duties didn't have.
Yes.
And fair to say that you used force where you could justify it?
Where it was justified, yes.
And on reflection, having viewed a number of incidents of the use of force, do you accept that you also used force when it was not justified?
No.
On occasion?
No, I don't.
Part of your motivation wasn't it, to impress your colleagues?
No.
You were building a reputation for being hard and fast and fit?
I don't believe so, no.
That was important to you, wasn't it? Because your career going forward, if you stayed in the NT Police Force, would have been in the TRG, and if you left, you wanted it to be in the SAS or doing private contract work in dangerous countries.
Yes, I believe the next step in my career would have been my plan obviously was the TRG, but that wasn't the end state, no.
But this idea that you were hard and fast and decisive was important to you, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you were pleased with the reputation that you were building in that regard.
I'm not sure of that.
Well, what we've got in the brief of evidence now, through your text messages and through the videos on your phone, is a number of examples where you boast about the use of force. Do you accept that?
Yes.
That, for example, the text to your family where you send body worn video,
Yes.
the video of you and Mr. Hanson where the Aboriginal men in the park were pushed over and it's played back with the woods
Yes.
sound effects. The video involving Christopher Walker where firearms were drawn when you entered the house.
Yes.
And you video that on your body worn video and show it back.
Yes.
They're all incidents, aren't they, where there's a fair bit of ego wrapped up in your use of force. Is that fair on reflection?
I can see you get there, yeah.
You can see me getting there, but do you accept it on reflection, Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Do you accept that on those occasions you behaved in a way, or on some occasions, let's take the Uts video, you behaved in a way that was over the top when you look back and reflect on a young man?
I reflected my behaviour in videoing that it was obviously exceptionally unprofessional. Again, on the ground, on duty, no.
Boasting about the use of force was extremely unprofessional, wasn't it?
Yes, I accept that.
But when you did that, either with your family or with your friends, I think the Christopher Walker video was sent to some family and also someone with the initials NK. When you showed it to others in the muster room, no one pulled you up and said, Zach, that's unprofessional. Zach, don't do that. Worried about your behaviour or that conduct.
Correct. I can never recall anything like that.
That must have given you the impression then, or reinforced the idea that it was okay to do that.
Correct.
Similarly, can I suggest to you, when there were text messages which were sent between you and a sergeant, which you might look back on and be embarrassed about, if nobody pulls you up on that behaviour at the time, it effectively gives the message that it's condoned.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. Do you remember when you were having an exchange with Sergeant Kirkby about not getting in the TRG?
Yes.
And he responds to you, I'm paraphrasing, but I can find the text message. It's chicks, blacks, gays, they all get in before us, and then it's people like you and me, wealthy.
Yes.
So he's supporting this idea that you're hard done by not getting in the TRG, and other minorities are getting in before you as a white man.
Yes, he's agreeing with me, yes.
Not very good mentoring or support from Sergeant Kirkby at that time, was it?
It's not done in a very professional way. The message I received from that, I don't believe, is a entirely negative message. His intentions are to support me in that message. Obviously, the language used is not widely accepted, but the message received was a message of support.
Well, I'll just remind you of what it actually said, to be fair. It's text message 463, and you're talking about the application and getting the application. The application was rejected, and you say the application was fine, except Dashi wrote a stupid comment and Vickery didn't fill out her bit at all. But they reckon that applicants have, quote, longer and more diverse careers than me, and recommend I go out bush for 12 months, ha ha, fucking joke. And then Kirkby writes back, that's their standard line now. Everyone knows people go out bush because they're fucking lazy. Maybe that's who they're looking for now. The order of preference is blacks, chicks, gays and lazy fucks. Then Zach. That must have given you the impression that it was okay as a police officer in the Northern Territory to express a view that bush police were lazy fucks and that blacks, chicks and gays were getting in over fit, young, healthy white men like you who could do better.
It condones that language is acceptable in private, but I believe a lot of that is the case in regard to special measures hiring in the Northern Territory Police. It will just be written more professionally, obviously, and the lazy fucks comment is more so that, I think we mentioned it before, that lazy police officers also often don't get complaints because they're not doing the work that others are doing. So yes, it does condone that language in private.
I think you said earlier that you think he was trying to be supportive of you.
Yes.
It's a pretty unprofessional way to be supportive of you, isn't it?
Correct. That's why, it
Pretty
was done
toxic
privately.
I'm sorry, I think
That's why it would have been done privately, yes.
a pretty toxic way of supporting you, though.
My head is not wrapped around how the toxic is defined in this day and age, so I wouldn't be able to, I'd need it asked differently.
Okay. This is another example of the support you had from your mentor. This time, Sergeant Bowen's 9th of July 2019, where you tell him you've just knocked off, and he says these bush coons aren't used to people going after them. You say, yeah, bush cops blow my mind. I'll tell you about these dudes when I see you. That must have given you the impression, Mr. Rolfe, that it was okay to use that language, coons?
I believe when I read that message at the time, I read that as him writing bush cops, because that was what we were talking about, and that's why I went straight back to talking about bush cops. The first time that I noticed that word had been said by him was in the brief.
Well, you wouldn't have been shocked to hear a police officer use the word coon.
Not a police officer. I was shocked to see that from Sergeant Bowens, to be honest.
Even though Sergeant Bowens had been himself a recipient of the Nugget Award?
I wasn't aware that he was.
Sergeant Bowens had been a member of the TIG when the Nugget Awards were given out. You knew that, didn't you?
I believe I knew it was likely.
Certainly there was nothing about that text message at the time that made you concerned or think it was out of the ordinary.
Again, I didn't notice that the word had been said. I thought he'd written bush cops.
On the last occasion, you gave evidence that you accepted that for some people, the use of dehumanising language can impact on their behaviour.
Yes.
You reflected that might happen in a theatre of war, for example.
Yes, it's a tool used in the theatre of war, among other tools, to condition soldiers that are less likely to actually fire at the enemy to do so.
And do you accept that for some police officers, the use of dehumanising racist language might in fact impact on their behaviour?
Well, I object to this. First of all, it's covered in the examination, Chief. And secondly, he's not an expert in these areas. He could only give...
This has been covered.
Mr. Abbott specifically asked Mr. Rolfe whether or not racism played a part. I'm nearly finished. I'm about to move to the 9th of November. But I pressed this question and to give Mr. Rolfe an opportunity to reflect, in fact, on what he's just been asked by Mr. Abbott, with the benefit of the things I'm going to put to him.
I'll allow the question.
Mr. Rolfe, you said on the last occasion when I was asking you questions that the use of racist language could in fact impact on some people's behaviours, but just to cut to the chase, what you said was you didn't think it impacted on yours.
Yes.
Correct. What you now have had the opportunity to reflect on in your messages and in questions asked of you is that there are examples where you photograph a black man injured in hospital, where you boast about the use of force to your family, where that includes use of force on a man who injured his arm when in fact he hadn't been guilty of any offence. You remember all that?
Yes.
So can I suggest to you that your use of racist language may well have impacted on your behaviour towards members of the community?
I'll disagree.
Coming now to the 9th of November 2019. In the days leading up to the 9th of November, as you've given evidence, including to Mr. McMahon, for example, you had been critical of the response of Officers Hand and Smith, and you recall that Dr. Freckleton asked you these questions this morning.
Yes.
And you acknowledged that you had been you were critical of them in part because you thought that they had frozen and had a fear response.
As in like freeze or flight, yes.
That's right. You thought they'd been too soft, in effect.
No.
There are text messages between yourself and Paddy McCormack. Was that Sergeant McCormack?
Yes.
Sergeant McCormack was an officer that you looked up to when you were in the military police force.
Yes.
And you recall that you texted him with the body-worn video footage from Hannon Smith.
I sent him it.
Yes, did you?
I'm not sure.
Is it the fact that you watched it? I might have misremembered the evidence. You watched that body-worn video with Sergeant McCormack in the muster room?
He may have watched it and then texted me about it.
So the impression he gives to you is that he is also critical of what they did on that day.
Yes.
He says, as you'll recall, and this is from text 547 in MF5MM, I'm sorry I watched that, fuck me. And you say, yeah, eh? And he says, you imagine if that other cop got killed and he stood there and watched it with his fucking hands up, what the fuck have we become? And you say, I know, eh? Fuck my whole life. So you're exchanging with him an opinion that what Officers Hand and Smith did was, in effect, too soft.
It's got nothing to do with being soft or hard. It's got to do with the right response versus the response that's not right.
All right, let me put it like that then. You're exchanging with him the idea that their response was wrong.
Yes.
And that, in effect, the Northern Territory Police Force was not going to function properly if that was the sort of response that officers gave to those incidents.
If that was the general response in regard to those situations, it's developed due to the training and conditioning conducted by the NT Police, and that's a failure by the NT Police.
So your view that was critical of Hannon Smith was certainly reinforced to you by Sergeant McCormack?
I wouldn't say it's reinforced, but he agreed with my view. Other members that I've shared different views than I, and I still have the same view that I have.
In the 3 days leading up to it, the people that you were sharing the body-worn video with or watched it with or who watched it independently were expressing a view that they were critical of what had happened.
Some were, some weren't. Obviously Shane King, I believe, has given evidence that he was watching it with us, and he, I believe, pulled someone else up about their view that was critical. Okay. So there was a mix. I'm
asking you about what you knew back then during those 3 days or 2 days between the 7th of November when you started to watch the body-worn video and the 9th of November. It was your view that people senior to you and your colleagues were critical of what Hannon Smith had done.
Some, correct, because I was there when Shane King made those comments.
Some, including Paddy McCormack, who was someone that you looked up to in the force.
Yes.
And your determination was that you'd be committed to the job of picking up Kumanjayi? Scooping him up or grabbing him up if you came across him?
If I was called out to do so, yes. If I had, I believe I was given the task in Alice Springs to look for him.
And you were proactive in doing so?
Yes.
You thought, didn't you, that compared to bush cops, you'd be fitter and faster and harder and better at picking him up?
But in comparison to some bush cops, yes.
In comparison to bush cops like Hannon Smith?
In comparison to those two, yes.
And in comparison to a number of bush cops who you've been critical about in your text exchanges?
Yes.
When you got to Yundamu, you have given evidence of some conversation that you had with Sergeant Frost, and you've been asked about it by a number of my colleagues.
Yes.
When I asked you questions, I suggested to you that there was a photograph of Mr. Walker on your phone that had been taken from the arrest plan, and you denied that.
Yes.
You said you got that photo elsewhere.
Looking at that photo, obviously I can't recall, but looking at that photo, it didn't match up with the photo from the arrest plan. In reflection, I'm not sure if there were two photos on my phone. I may have taken a photo earlier at the station and then screenshotted that photo, which would change the data of that photo. But yes, I remember that evidence.
Might you have taken a photograph also from the arrest plan on your phone?
No.
You did take a photograph of the arrest plan though, didn't you?
Correct, of that bottom corner.
Okay. I'll just hand you a photograph of that so that the evidence can be clear. Miss Walls is providing it to you. That's the photograph, is it, that was taken on your telephone?
I believe so,
Can I have
yes.
a copy of this, please, so that I can follow the evidence.
And what it says there is in red, no arrest, liaison with Superintendent Nobbs and Superintendent Vickery, implementation of the plan, locations of interest, and there's a couple of houses listed there.
Yes.
So you certainly, at one point in time, had access to that arrest plan that you took a photograph of, correct?
Correct. My attention was drawn to that corner of the page, yes.
And you were provided with a copy of the arrest plan.
No.
You knew that there was an arrest plan, didn't you?
I knew that there was a desired timing that me and Julie Frost then discussed with the other police officers.
And you knew, didn't you, in terms of the desired timing at 5 a.m. in the morning or thereabouts, that Felix Alfeo was being offered to assist you?
Again, as per my previous evidence, I believe the conversation had was that he would to remain at the station and assist with the aftercare.
You knew that there was a 5 a.m. arrest plan, and that plan was expressed by Julie Frost, Sergeant Frost, to you. Do you accept that?
No, she told me again that her desired arrest time was 0500. Again, I asked her where Kumanjayi would be at 0500. She said she had no idea. We then developed another action of moving forward.
She said she had no idea, but the photograph I just showed you demonstrates that there were a number of houses that were on a written arrest plan. Do you accept that?
Yes.
And it's the case, isn't it, officer, that Sergeant Frost told you about an arrest plan, and the arrest plan changed in your mind after you spoke to her?
The question's being asked slightly differently. My answer remains exactly the same.
Have a look at the notes that you produced or that you took into the witness box with you, if you don't mind.
Yes.
If you turn onto page 6. There's a subheading, intelligence gathering plan.
Yeah.
Burning ourselves as soon as we started gathering evidence. Ethan Robertson warns Rikisha after 577. 5, not safest. Intel shows he slept behind a locked door with a DV victim, a potential hostage with lethal weapons. The plan was changed. As I had said, 5 a.m, no idea where he was going to be at all. All our IRT members' evidence is that I gave a briefing on us going to 577 to look for him in the presence of Julie Frost, etc. So can I suggest to you that there's an acknowledgement in these notes that there was a 5 a.m. arrest plan developed by Sergeant Frost, and the plan was changed after you heard it and you disagreed with it.
The word plan has been said that many times that you can utilise the word plan for this email that's been given out. My evidence remains the same, that isn't a full plan, that's a desired timing, but obviously the word has been used so much in this Coronial that this email is referred to as a plan. When I'm saying plan, I know what I'm referring to. These are my notes, these are my thoughts. I do not agree that this is a plan. But you could substitute that for timing, idea, the idea to arrest him at 5 a.m, the desired timing to arrest him at 5 a.m.
I'm going to read to you the evidence that Sergeant Frost gave on the 5th of December to police 2019 before she had any understanding of what you or others were going to say in your evidence, and before she had any understanding that her evidence would conflict with yours. She gave evidence.
What was the date?
I object to this.
Of December
With respect,
2019.
Your Honour, this is a topic that could and should have been covered in the first round of examination that the learned friend conducted.
It was to some extent, Your Honour, it arises because of the notes, which make specific reference to the arrest plan at 5 a.m. on the page that I just pointed out.
It's a matter for submissions, the evidence of what Sergeant Frost said or did in her examination.
Given that the word plan in relation to 5 a.m. is reproduced in these notes of Mr. Rolfe, I am going to allow a question.
Sergeant Frost says on that occasion, on the 5th of December 2019, overnight, the plan was that they were going to do high visibility policing, familiarise themselves with the town, perhaps gather some intel and prepare for the arrest. They were also going to cover Chris Hand and myself because we'd been up all night the previous night. She goes on to say the whole plan was that they were going to come, be working through the night, be available for call, anything that happens, and then at 5:30 in the morning, Felix will commence duty and they'll have a briefing amongst themselves. I suggest to you, Mr. Rolfe, that that was the plan that Sergeant Frost explained, and that you didn't disagree with her when she outlined the plan, but in fact the plan was changed afterwards by yourself.
I disagree again. I believe the evidence she gave in the Coronial is different than that she expected us to play basketball with the youth. So I disagree with her evidence.
Mr. Rolfe, you disagreed with the idea that that was a plan, the 5 a.m. or the 5:30 arrest plan?
I believe the way it's set out is a desired timing. There is no completion of a plan in regard to the way that the police are taught in regard to the SMEAC method.
But what you determined to do in going out to grab up Kumanjayi, as you said on video, was an arrest arrangement with no team leader, no risk assessment, and no plan for coordinated control. Is that correct?
Well, there was, again, those three things you mentioned. I'm not aware of them being, if they're the requirements for a plan in your mind, I don't see those subheadings on the email at all. But we, as I've said previously, we left the police station with the intention of arresting Kumanjayi Walker.
You left the police station without any SMEAC plan that was developed by yourself or anybody else in the IRT? Correct.
We went out to, obviously the goal was to arrest Kumanjayi Walker. At first we would need to gather information, analyse it and gather intelligence. If we did that without locating him, then the plan would be made.
Suggest to you that the reason that you ignored the advice from Sergeant Frost, if we put it like that, her preferred time of 5:30 was because you thought you know better than her in what to do.
I disagree with the whole question because I didn't ignore her advice.
You thought you knew better than a bushcop in terms of any plan or arrangement she was suggesting.
No, again, I didn't ignore her advice.
Mr. McMahon suggested to you that in going into house 577 with a safety clasp off and clearing the house, and then going into house 512 in the way that you did, suggests that you were, in his words, itching to shoot someone. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
Even if Her Honour accepts that that was not the case, accepts your evidence on that, do you accept that what you were doing in going into house 577 and 511 is indicating a clear desire, I would draw that, is indicating that you would use violence at the slightest indication that it could be justified?
No.
Instead of mitigating the risk that Kumanjayi presented, you put yourself directly in his path, didn't you?
Yes, correct.
That was in house 511.
Correct.
Do you agree? This is what you told Ms. Shorten in the interview you did on the 5th of December 2019. With the situation I was put in, I would not do anything differently. I do not wish I had done anything differently. I wouldn't change what I did. Is your evidence different now to the story that you told Ms. Shorten on the 5th of December?
Well, it's all hypotheticals. Again, action on if I placed in a room with if I was a police officer again, placed in a room with an offender, I would treat the offender politely and respectfully until they caused me to treat them otherwise. Looking back beforehand, I changed that. If I was in hindsight now in a similar situation out bush, I would not go outside the bush station without a bush police officer to avoid any I guess, argument of me doing anything wrong.
What about to avoid a situation where you took the young man's life? What about to avoid the risk to yourself and a member of the public? Is that a good reason to do something different?
I defended my own life against him and defended Ebel's life.
On the yesterday, you said that you made the wrong threat assessment in going into House 511. You remember that?
Yes.
Do you accept that what was actually involved then, given your evidence yesterday, is an act of officer-induced jeopardy, as described by a number of senior officers?
Yes, I believe again, I think I've talked about it before, the idea of officer-induced jeopardy isn't entirely accepted or researched, yes, but by the way in which people are talking about that, every time an officer does their job, every time an officer does their duty in arresting an offender, that would induce officer-induced jeopardy.
You respect Superintendent Pollock, don't you?
I don't know him.
He's someone that you know had a reputation for excellence in the Northern Territory Police Force.
Correct, he has a good reputation.
And had been in the Northern Territory Police Force for over 3 decades before he retired recently.
I would accept that.
And you understand that he reviewed the circumstances of Kumanjayi's shooting.
Yes.
And this is what he says. First, he defines officer-induced jeopardy: situations where officers needlessly put themselves in danger, committing an unforced tactical error that makes them vulnerable and thus in a position where they must use deadly force to protect themselves. And that's what happened. That's what he describes happened in this situation. Do you accept that in hindsight?
I think you may have asked the exact same question before, and I answered by saying, by asking to see that quote in front of me, and I went through it and changed 1 word or 2 words out of his quote, and then I agreed with that.
So that's still the case now?
The exact same answer to the same question, I agree with my first answer.
Dr. Freckleton put to you a quote from Spotlight where you're talking about Officers Hand and Smith, and you're effectively saying you're not going to learn anything unless you take personal responsibility for what occurred.
Yes.
You take some personal responsibility, do you, for what occurred on the 9th of November, given your failures with respect to threat assessment?
I take complete responsibility for the death of Kumanjayi Walker.
Do you accept that it could have been avoided with a planned response with a suitably experienced team leader in place?
Yeah, there's many things that could have occurred previously. That there are many social policies and policing policies that could have changed, including on the ground level, team leader, local police presence that could have averted that death potentially.
And in terms of your own personal responsibility, do you accept that there were things that you could have done in terms of preparation and risk assessment that might have prevented Kumanjayi's death?
Potentially, yes.
Final question for you. You are quoted, I'll draw that, in these notes that were produced. Could I ask you please to have a look at the same page I referred you to earlier about the 5 a.m. plan?
Yes.
Do you see the 8th bullet point there where you write, the arrest was a success. Whether you pass an exam with 75% or 100%, it's still a success. It could just be better. Correction. From a police on the ground point of view, success. From an organisation, it seems the organisation failed. Do you still maintain that this arrest was a success?
So this is
from a police on the ground point of view?
Well, this is a thought process. This is me pondering to myself, as I said before. This is me pondering the use of the term failed arrest multiple times, and this is just me questioning that and exploring that statement as the use of force training in the NT states that the success of a mission will be judged primarily by the extent of which use of force is minimised or avoided. I'm not aware of, due to the fact that I have, as I said before, this investigation into the shooting has been finalised with me receiving remedial guidance, which doesn't reach the level of discipline. I'm not aware of me being, if I have not used the minimum force, then I would assume that a finding of use of excessive force would have been made by the police force. If that's not the case, I'm thinking in my head, if I still use the minimum force as per the training requirement, what facilitates an arrest success? Is it the fact that the death of a offender immediately constitutes a failure? Or on the ground, do I say, I feel like I saved my life, potentially saved Ebel's life. That's a successful on the ground. It's just a pondering.
Okay, it's a pondering, but you've got the opportunity for a thought process now in the witness block, so I'm asking you about it. But before I do, you just gave evidence about your confusion between the jury verdict of not guilty and your disciplinary process following that verdict. Is that right?
No.
Mr. Rolfe, is this the situation? Please help me explain it if it's not. That you are confused or you reflect on the fact that it's discordant, that during Barham's evidence in the jury trial, he said that you used excessive force in the second and third shot with Kumanjayi, and yet after the trial you were only subject to remedial advice. Is that what you're confused about?
No. No, I'm just thinking in my head, like, the success of an operation in the use of force manual does not state explicitly the success of an operation is judged by whether or not an offender lives or dies. It's just a pondering. For example, there's other situations in Australia where offenders have been killed by police and it's considered a success. I don't need to go through them, but it's just a thought. So my thought was to get, if I have not been found to use anything other than the minimum force necessary, and that's what the success of a job is judged by, but the findings are that I use the minimum force necessary, how is it not classified in at least police doctrine as a success? Or is it just the narrative that's being pushed by the police and media? That first someone called it a bungled arrest and then everybody carried on keeping it called a bungled arrest.
On the last occasion, that is in the evidence that you just gave, I think it was when Mr. Abbott was asking you questions, you said that you didn't understand how it could be put during a jury trial that your actions were excessive and it was an excessive use of force, when in fact, after the trial finished, you were only given remedial advice. That's the evidence that you gave, isn't it, in response to either Mr. Abbott or Mr. Freckleton, or
Dr. Freckleton was.
in response to Dr. Freckleton.
No, I gave the evidence, and it was that the police seem to still support, and I believe it may have been said in Coronial that the police support Andrew Barham's evidence. Andrew Barham obviously stands by his evidence, and his evidence does not change. His evidence is that it was an unlawful killing. That's his evidence. It seems to be supported by the NT police, at least vocally in the Coronial. There's a number of incidents of the NT police saying one thing and their actions are another, but then, so the fact that they're supporting this outwardly, saying basically saying that it's an unlawful killing, but the fact is that their actions in regard to the investigation were to finalise it with remedial guidance.
Who gave you remedial guidance?
I believe the email was sent by a officer with the last name of Hill. It was mentioned initially by Dr. Freckleton in my very first sitting down here.
And is it the case that you took legal action to fight the disciplinary process with respect to any use of force?
I'm not sure. Dr. Freckleton's shaking his head, so I don't think so.
Were you ever disciplined in relation to your racist text messages?
I would have to look through all my... I think I received remedial guidance for every incident except for speaking to the media. And
that's because, isn't it, there were, at least in relation to, for example, racist text messages, over 2 years had passed since they were discovered. Do you know that?
I object to that. He's asked to attribute the reason to why the police took action.
Is it in your knowledge? That's my question.
How can it be?
A lot of the police procedures are within Mr. Roberts' knowledge. I
Hardly that one, it's 2 years after.
I withdraw
the
it.
events.
Do you suggest, Mr. Rolfe, that if the police in fact are critical still of your actions in House 511, then you should have been subject to more than remedial advice after the trial?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. If the police are of the view that I unlawfully killed Kumanjayi Walker or used excessive force, and they believe that's the case, and they can prove that with their evidence, then remedial advice would surely not be the right outcome.
Then I go back to what was to be my final question, which is on that page I just referred you to, you have in your musings or thought process written the arrest was a success. Whether you pass an exam with 79 or 100%, it's still a success. It could just be better. In fact, on reflection, think about it now sitting there in a witness box. A young man lost his life. The community is still in mourning. The police and community are still dealing with the fallout many years after. You would agree, wouldn't you, that in fact your confrontation to try and arrest Kumanjayi Walker resulted in an abject failure in terms of placing him on the territory?
Again, the thing is I need to say is that if the success of a mission is primarily judged on the extent that use of force is avoided or minimised, and if the findings are that I used minimum force necessary, then by police own standards the arrest is a success.
Who made a finding that you used the minimum force necessary?
That's what I'm saying. If the police have made the finding that I haven't done that, then I would accept that the arrest would be a failure. But I have not been made aware of that finding.
Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr.
Your Honour, I have one question only. Happy to articulate it, so you want to draw on it.
sure.
If you want to hear the question, look, I just asked it.
I'll hear the question, and if there's any objection, I'll hear the objection, and if there's no objection, I'll hear the answer.
Yes. Mr. Rolfe, at the trial, did you hear Sergeant Julie Frost say that she had said to you, quote, by all means, if you come across him, obviously arrest him? That's the question I want to put.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
When I attend to those 2 pages that were put to Mr. Rolfe from the arrest plan, the photographs, they will be, I'm informed by Ms. Ward's, Exhibit 30.
Thank you.
2 pages.
That completes your evidence, Mr. Rolfe.
Sorry, there are 2 pages.
In this inquest, I am determined as best I can to find the truth of the circumstances surrounding the death of Kumanjayi Walker, and I assure you that your evidence is an important part of this process.
Thank you.
You're excused. Dr. Dwyer,
Just before we break, I think we're going to break for the day and have the next witness tomorrow morning. Before we do, might Mr. Coleridge put something on the record in relation to the call for production from Sergeant Boland's yesterday?
Your Honour, recall that Mr. Slater made submissions to the effect that the further statement that he liked to be requested to be rejected. I formally called for that document with it. We've sent a number of emails to Mr. Slater asking for it to be provided. None of them have been answered. I ask that you give Sergeant Boland until 9:30 to begin to find the answer to the call.
yes.
Your Honour, that completes the evidence for today. Tomorrow we have Commissioner Michael Murphy, who's kindly agreed to appear, I think at 9:30 a.m. Commissioner Murphy will be the last witness in this inquest, but we will have a family statement by way of a video statement then played after Commissioner Murphy's evidence. And then we'll conclude.
Thank you. We'll adjourn to 9.